Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, my goodness, they absolutely got it correct in so many different ways. And yes, this is Tom Navolis, your host. And as always, I'm delighted that you're joining me either by radio, by podcast on the internet, or either YouTube or none other than the other Rumble. So let's rumble, because that's what we're talking about today. We are talking about the rumbling that is going on in all of our political environment. I'm calling this the contentious political rhetoric. And my friends, it's nothing new. That's why if you go to samueladamsreturns.net and look at the newsletter, blog post for the program, that's where you can also find the podcast and videos, is that this is a history of the contentious political rhetoric. Nothing new under the sun, as I always say. Now, with that, we have to take some steps into our history. We're going to talk about not only what happened, especially in the 1800 election, and the, let's say, the vigor there in language and attacks and so on, but also that there was some real violence, especially in the 1800s, in respect to what happened politically. Not only in the point of view of what was going on in the general populace in relationship to the various campaigns, but also inside of Congress. And that in a couple instances, there were brawls, physical brawls in the House in particular. Knives were drawn, guns were drawn. In one instance, one congressman beat the other congressman within inches of his life. So I do not want to hear what the Democrats and the neocon, whatever you want to call those Republicans that are going along with the Democrats. I don't want to hear their nonsense, because what they are is what I'm going to take you into, especially in the second segment. So if you do not get the second segment in some of the markets, I highly suggest then that you go to the website at samueladamsreturns.net and either listen to the whole podcast or move ahead into it, or download the video or watch the video of it as well to get to that second segment, because I'm going to talk to you about planned antagonist, planned aggravation, planned. And where did these plans develop? Interesting. Very interesting. And that is the planned mechanisms that are going to be discussed in the second and maybe a little bit in the third segment. We'll see. As you well know, I roll through a lot of information. As always, there are a lot of references for you to go over, but I want to tease you a little bit with what's going to happen in the second segment by looking at this. And as I expand the discussion here on the history of the contentious political rhetoric, we're really looking at it stepping up. We're really seeing it happening more frequently, especially during these last few days up to, November 8th. Yep, it's the full communist dialectic. Let me give you that hint. This week, I said I'm not going to write a lot of content there. I did not. There's a lot of references for the blog post at samueladamsreturns.net, and I would hope that you go there and look at all those references. Now, everything is relative to communications and messaging and people coming together. I am going to talk a bit about today of an interesting article that I found on a Lord Shaftesbury and in the whole idea of polarization, or what does draw people together. But at the same time, I want us to start with the revolution of 1800. I thought the revolution, Tom, was in 1776. I thought that was the revolution all the way through 1800. What are you talking about, 1800? 1800 was the most, what would we call it, the most contentious rhetoric that there ever has been in our political history. And that was the presidential election between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Crazy stuff. And it's there for you to really go through the details. But when we talk about political parties eating one another, like we're seeing in the Republican / maybe a real Republican Party emerging in our present time, that happened with the Federalist during 1800. None other than our person of interest that so many like, Alexander Hamilton, wrote a major, what we would call, hit piece on John Adams. Not Thomas Jefferson, but John Adams, his own party. You got to remember, Hamilton was a Federalist. So you need to go into that and understand that Hamilton ultimately despised John Adams. And he was, as the historians, modern historians looking back, they believe that what Hamilton did destroyed the opportunities for John Adams' reelection. One of the important areas to understand at that founding period was the distinction between what the Federalists wanted as a consolidated major government, top-down environment, expanding into all of the industrialization of America, that there were the other side with the Democratic Republicans or Republican Democrats of Thomas Jefferson, who wanted liberty as it was established from the Declaration of Independence, and understanding you needed industry, but at the same time, what did it mean to have it from an agrarian philosophical point of view? That was the great contention. And Jefferson was all about states' rights and the rights of the individuals over the federal government. Whereas the Federalists, especially with Hamilton, wanted the federal government, as I've told you before in many other programs, to subsume the states and draw them all into the federal government, as it has been happening over the last 100 years. So the Anti-Federalists were very true in their predictions, very true in the way that they looked at it. And the first battle of that was in 1800. So Thomas Jefferson describes the 1800 election as this: a revolution in the principles of our government. So it was the every bit as real as the 1776 was in its form. That was a quote from Thomas Jefferson: a revolution in the principles of government, as real as that of 1776 was in its form. But in 1776, the revolution to a republican form of government independent from monarchical Britain had been violent, internally as well as externally. While in the 1800 revolution, it was peaceful. This in itself was a revolutionary change in the way that principles of political conflict were normally resolved. So Jefferson meant, and he was more clear in, that the principles of government, and what he meant by that, as I already explained, was how would things be administered? How would it be different in his administration from those principles of the Federalist? So that 1800 revolution at the time and the contention in all of it was around these very principles of government. We have that going on. We had that going on in 2016, happened again in 2020. And unfortunately, in 2020, as much as the public, and this is where I will use a commentary from, let me just jump to it real quick, because this sets the tone. And it is here that I really want to begin with, that what we have are it's not the left. I think that it's come out very clearly what we have in this administration are activists, Marxists, not just socialists. So they had a plan, and that goes into the plan we're going to talk about. So here's a quote from that, from someone else in that relationship. So this is by Joseph PIEPER, and he says, the common element in all of this is the degeneration of language into an instrument of rape. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? It does contain violence, albeit in latent form. And precisely this is one of the lessons recognized by Plato through his own experience with the sophists of his time, a lesson he set before us as well. This lesson, in a nutshell, says the abuse of political power is fundamentally connected with the sophistic abuse of the word. Indeed, finds in it the fertile soil in which to hide and grow and get ready, so much so that the latent potential of the totalitarian poison can be ascertained, as it were, by observing the symptom of the public abuse of language. The degradation, too, of man through man by all tyrannies has its beginning, catch this, when the word loses its dignity. We have so much of that going on. So much of that has been developed in the uses by the Marxist media, which is all of the major media, as well as what we're hearing even from the speech of Biden this past week, trying to rally the Democrats and coming into the whole idea of democracy, over 20 times in a short little speech he used democracy. Well, we're a republic, and democracy is that which the communists, socialists, anarchists, and globalists want. Now, let me take you into this little tidbit here on the role of agitation. So here it is, and I'm going to emphasize something in here as well, and I'll let you know. So the quote goes like this: but the overall effect of agitation will be a powerful force in compelling people to action, often around a new question or outrage which is completely unrelated to the specific things exposed before. Of course, the party, and I put in quotes, today's Democrat Party, must seek to concentrate on promoting such major struggles, and its agitation must play a role in publicizing, popularizing, and organizing them. There is a role for calls to action, but they should not be confused with agitation, which occupies an overall more important place than such calls to action. My friends, we see that Samuel Adams knew how to get people to engage, but the communists have perfected that to the point of today's contentious ideological political rhetoric. So as we come back into Samuel Adams Returns for that next segment, we're going to really dig into this strategy of Marxists versus liberty. So come on back for more of Samuel Adams Returns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns. The Anti-Federalist got it right. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and we're going to move fast. We have a lot to cover. There are a lot of just good, solid pieces of information there at the website, samueladamsreturns.net, for today's program. And I highly recommend that you go there, because in there I have that letter that Hamilton wrote against John Adams and so much more. And it's really important that you take a look at that. The area that I want to cover right now for this second segment is from the Marxist publication that was first produced in a Marxist magazine called Revolution, and this was in December of 1978. The article opens this way: "Together, agitation and propaganda are a mighty and indispensable weapon in the party's revolutionary arsenal. And the ones that are perfecting it and have perfected it are the Democrat Party." Because as I noted to you back in 2010, the Communist Party USA claimed its ownership and the fact that it took over the Democrat Party at that time, especially when Obama became president. So we can take this 1978 article and apply it as the working mechanism for contentious political rhetoric in messaging, propaganda, and most importantly, what we've been seeing during the Trump administration, because it was the Democrats bringing it on, is agitation. Agitation. So, once again, this article opens is that together agitation and propaganda are a mighty and indispensable weapon in the Democrat Party's revolutionary arsenal. How else but with vivid, compelling agitation, as well as propaganda, can the hatred which is provoked by daily life under capitalism be further aroused and sharpened against the bourgeoisies? How else but by agitation and propaganda can the word, the sparks, and the lessons of struggles waged by now one, now another section of the masses be spread nationwide? How else can class struggle be waged in the crucial arena of public opinion against the ruling class, whose ideas also are the ruling ideas in society, and who spend millions and millions of dollars yearly to produce and deluge of their own agitation and propaganda, spreading confusion, defeatism, and reaction? Interesting beginning. Now, I have to segue as we move into this, because as you are understanding and very observant of, this is also what the globalist, the internationalist, the Davos class have been a part of. George Soros spends billions, when you add it all up, to take and participate in this messaging. What? Klaus Schnuckelhead, they're back in Davos in the World Economic Forum. They are doing it through utilizing all of, like, Blackstone and all of the other mega funds to drive the messaging all the way into businesses in such a way that they're inundating employees with this contentious rhetoric. Worse, you have the teachers union, the NEA in particular, spending $57 million on leftists. Hello, all you teachers out there. How is it that you're not fighting your union? How is it that you're not suing the union for misuse and misrepresentation of your dollars? Oh, what fools educators are. You're just a bunch of lambs at the slaughterhouse. Sorry, but that's the truth. Lastly, in that regard, what we have are not all of. Whoa, I have to take that back. All of a sudden, it just comes to my mind. Look what Elon Musk is doing and how he's taken on the administration, the socialists, the communists, by buying Twitter and taking on directly the commentaries that are coming from the likes of, the Joe Biden can't speak for himself, but whoever it is that's speaking for Joe Biden in social media and that, Elon Musk is putting them absolutely in their place on what it is for free speech, what it is to counter this idea of agitation and what? Propaganda. Agitation and propaganda. So there are so many activities that are going on that it's critical to understand more about this, and the references there for you at samueladamsreturns.net to be able to go and read this whole 1978 article for yourself. Now, with the educational component, what I wanted to do is talk about the brainwashing of children, which is happening when we see all of the evil and the rhetoric. And remember, the abuse of words, the actual degradation of words, the word gay has been degraded, taken down to its lowest possible meaning, morally degrading. Everything around this whole transgender, all of that is taking and brainwashing our children. The education system is exactly what this Katia Soldak talks about. She's a Forbes staffer. She wrote in December of 2017, "This is how propaganda works. A look inside a Soviet child." And she tells her story and how the Soviet educational system brainwashed the children. That's what we have in these United States now, is the Soviet degradation of words, of brainwashing children. Ultimately, I say, and there's an article there, that this is all a component of hell. The devil takes and has been twisting words and language ever since the Garden of Eden and Adam and Eve. So this is the work of the enemy. But I wanted you to take and clearly read that article as well on what is going on and a look inside of a Soviet child, because this is what is being produced in our children right now. So in this segment, let me take you directly over to the article that I was talking about. I want to bring out a few quick components. I don't have them all underlined, but in this article, as it talks about on the role of agitation and propaganda, the communists in America, the fundamentals that they are looking at is at agitation. What is agitation? Agitation, whether spoken or written, generally focuses on one event and one contradiction and seeks to make a single idea powerfully clear to broad numbers of people. It's like a sharp knife seeking to expose and make raw a glaring contradiction and draw blood around it. An emphasis in here is that it draws blood. This whole thing on agitation is to draw blood. And the idea of it is to take and bring out contradiction. What does that mean? How do you take and utilize the dialectic in such a way to take and show opposing points of view and to then focus on what the contradiction is? And that it takes and it is the destruction of what is going on. So it's very, very critical and important to understand some of these examples that, one example in particular that is cited by Lenin, that pointing to the death by starvation of unemployed workers' families, an agitator would seek to show how the senselessness of the contradiction between the increase of wealth and the increase of poverty, and he will strive to rouse discontent and indignation among the masses against this crying and using injustice. So what do we hear today? We hear exactly that. What is injustice? It's not a just society. We hear this also being played again in the whole race issue. We hear it being played in the injustice that now voting legislation is against transgender. Really? Did you see that article this week where these transgenders are saying because if you have proper voting registration and you identify only male and female, and if they're transgender, they don't know what the heck they are, and so they're claiming that that's injustice when it comes to their ability to vote. No, that's just flat out stupidity if you don't know what is designed according to God and is shown in your physical being at birth. Anyway, it goes on and talks about this. It talks about how Mao actually looked at how to perfect this idea and how to use even knowledge and the common essences of the certain knowledge to take and petrify people. Interesting. So when we take and we start drilling down in this even more, you have to look at the point of the general and particular speaking that Lenin was trying to expose in his paper and book, What is to be done? He points to how to develop the class-conscious workers must gain a clear picture of the nature of the system and different classes in society. He says this, and this is important. He says, you cannot obtain from any book. It cannot be obtained only in living examples and from exposures that follow close what is going on about us at any given moment. He goes on, upon what is being discussed, in whispers perhaps, by each one of his own way, upon what finds expression in such and such events, in such and such statistics, in such and such court sentences, etc. These comprehensive political exposures are an essential and fundamental condition for training the masses in revolutionary activity. In no way, except by means of such exposure, can the masses be trained in political conscience and revolutionary activity. So what we're seeing now, encountering all of this, is during this election cycle in particular, I think finally there are sensible people running as Republicans that are turning the spotlight around. They're turning it around so we're shining the light on what? All of these issues that the left has been calling as their truth, and showing how criminal it is, how these activities, in fact, are disassociated from anything that matters in relationship to liberty. There are many contradictions in what is promoted through a Marxist system versus what is in liberty. And I write about that just briefly in the blog post at samueladamsreturns.net, showing the difference, and we'll talk about a little bit more in the next segment, on the sphere that the Marxists are taking and showing versus what it is that we can talk about PIEPER's sphere sovereignty. That is taking and showing much difference between how our founders honored God and how it is that it is godless in relationship to everything that is going on right now with the Democrats and with the socialists. So come on back for the next segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists got it right. This is Tom Novolis. I do hope that you go to the website, samueladamsreturns.net, and that you take and listen to the second segment of the podcast, because what I'm going to talk about right now will have no continuity for you unless you go back and hear the beginning in that second segment in particular. The areas that we need to cover here on contentious political rhetoric, we're going to talk about in the latter part of this last segment, also involves the church. It has been for years now that the Christians, the evangelical Christians in particular, have ignored their biblical mandate of being involved. They've all run since the 70s when I understood what the biblical salvation is all about. What I've seen is that the evangelical churches, for the most part, except the Reformed in particular, everybody else has been running for the rooftop, waiting for some transition and ignoring their God-mandated responsibility to take and affect everything, all of culture, all of society, all of politics for God's kingdom. Not saying there's a kingdom on earth, because there's not until the reign of Jesus makes it so, but the fact is Christians, so-called Christians, evangelicals in particular, have failed in their biblical mandate. And instead of speaking the truth, instead of taking and making sure that words have true meaning, they have given way to what I've talked about in the last segment, to Marxist agitation and propaganda. So let me finish up real quick here before I move on to more of that in regards to the church, is that in contradiction. I mentioned that towards the end of the last segment, but this is what the article discusses, is that, but it is enough. Let me start that again for you. But is it enough to simply pose the problem or state the contradiction? While this may suffice in some cases, generally, to fully play its role, agitation requires more than this. Around a central contradiction and a clear-cut stand, facts and analysis must be mustered, all to strengthen and drive home the central point. Agitation does not exclude analysis, because analysis means probing, investigating, and thus laying bare contradiction. It is not enough for an agitational article on a tax hike to leave it at, quote, the little man gets screwed, end quote. For one thing, this doesn't distinguish communists one whit from populists and common reformers. Not to mention that a contrast barrage of such stuff will leave a reader with a very bored and empty feeling. If it is necessary to go deeper, to analyze, to force involved in producing and profiting from such an attack and indicate the basic class relations and laws of society standing behind and underlying it. The revolutionary solution to this contradiction should be indicated too. Also, of course, agitation cannot do this in the same all-round way as propaganda and develop the relation of this particular case to imperialism, crisis, and inevitability of socialist revolution. Mao spoke about this quite pointedly. Well, you see, the idea of agitation is that what we know to be happening in the media today. Everybody jumps on one point and has the same talking point across every station, every propaganda environment that is out there in the major media. We hear it that the politicians all have then the same talking point as well. But what's happened, very interestingly, is that they do not investigate the truth. In fact, what their investigations are now doing is revealing their corruption. So, as I mentioned in the last segment, it becomes incumbent upon all of those that are calling themselves Republicans, who may be populists, who may be nationalists, who may be those that might even be Christians running for office, that they're able to probe, that they have enough staff that can analyze the evils and be able to clearly articulate the difference between these Marxist agitations and propaganda to the truth of liberty. But without understanding a fundamental basis of that, well, what does it all mean? I mean, that's the same thing that's being asked in this article as well, is that if you're going to agitate from a communist, Marxist perspective, then you have to have a solution set that you're going to bring in there that sounds very good rhetorically. And you're going to drive that contentious rhetoric in from a point very focused on what is being communicated by what? Mitch McConnell. Boy, he can't communicate, his way out of a paper bag. He just holds a lot of money and a lot of power. Anyway, what it comes down to is trying to recognize from a way that we can defeat our enemy is not the same as just blabbering. We have to have a strong, powerful, well-directed message. It has to go very specifically targeted at an issue, at an item. A friend of mine who runs Lobbyists for Citizens in Lake County, Ohio, go look at their website. You can find it very easily. I have that right on the homepage, associated links there at samueladamsreturns.net, is that they are driving very hard on education. And in the various school districts in Lake County, they are able to take and reveal the nonsense that is going on to the destruction of our children and the waste of taxpayers' money, as well as some other issues. But they're very focused. They have a very clear and articulate way of uncovering what is against our liberties, our rights, our God-given rights, and the wastefulness of taxpayers' money. And it's all the leftists that are doing it. The pseudo-Marxists, because a lot of these people are not Marxists, they're just left-wingers. They're just no God, no concept of what a moral nation should be. Well, I don't want to take you down the whole road of a moral nation. We've had that conversation before, and we talked about that earlier in this month, last month in particular, because this is early November, but all through a good portion of October, I talked about Christian nationalism and what that really means. And there's more out there. I just saw that, there's some gent out there that's got a book on it that's out there on Christian nationalism and is being promoted very well. So you can always go and look for that. But what I wanted to finish with you is that there has been this contentious language in the church, and it's because, for the most part, Christians want to take the easy way out. And they do not want to stand and, here's a tough word for Christian, fight. I mean, really fight, willing to sacrifice everything, including their lives, for liberty, God-given liberty. Well, our founders did. Our founders were willing to give what? Their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor for liberty. And it had that fundamental core biblical Reformation root to it. Sorry, you evangelicals out there, you've missed the boat. And now we're in the situation we're in. Well, can you do anything about it now? Are you going to be able to read what's there at samueladamsreturns.net and glean the nuggets to take and, number one, fire your pastors if they're not teaching the true biblical action as required from a Reformation perspective? That's a tough question for you. And I don't know that the pastors are willing to take and get off the rooftop. Well, there's a number of them. I mean, if you take in all you folks down there in Lima, Ohio, who are listening to this, you well know our good friends and pastors there, and the whole association of all those pastors are the ones that are fighting very, very hard. So, thank you, Dr. Mike Spalding, for everything that you're doing and the war that you're willing to engage in, and all of those other pastors that are associated with you that understand the foundational biblical truth of engaging to the point of what it means of true sacrifice. Thank you for that. Where else? Not in the major denominations, that's for sure. And then let's look at the degradation of language in all of the liberal denominations. Those that support all the evils that are talked about in Scripture. They find a way to manipulate and twist Scripture so that they can justify their sin and destruction of liberty, because they are proponents of all that is going on in this agitation. And I know that there was a church here in Northeast Ohio that actually took and is involved in bringing the agitation of the leftist communities together and infiltrating and doing things in the public square in such a way that they want it all to be acceptable. That is a violation of God's law and word. So in this last minute, it is real critical for you to understand what it is about the central role of agitation in the political parties and political identity. Agitation is the glue holding all of political work together. This does mean that the party, the Democratic Party in particular, should be engaged in propaganda and such, but an agitation, they actually call it a sect. So it's a religion. Agitation and propaganda is a religion based on that of the Marxist, Leninist ideologies. Ladies and gentlemen, I gave you some solution sets on how to utilize this document, how to utilize all the references in this program to establish how to fight for our liberties. Now, the question is going to be, Are you willing to take and read and research for yourself? And are you willing to participate? Are you willing to stand your ground for your God-given rights and liberties as our founders did, as Sam Adams did? Come on back. When Samuel Adams returns, the Anti-Federalists did get it right.